Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Supply Chain Insights. My name is Lora Cecere. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and today I'm proud to interview Richard Barnett of Levadata to talk about Supply Chain 2030 and what it looks like. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate the invitation to join you on this conversation.
Yeah, well, you know, you're a supply chain leader, and I always love your insights. But before we get started, tell the group a little bit about yourself, because I know you better than maybe some others do.
Appreciate that, Laura. Yeah, I'm responsible for marketing and alliances at Levadata, and I've been in supply chain since the late 90s, actually, and starting with I2 Technologies, and have worked with different solution providers, really working on transformational enablement of supply chains globally, particularly within manufacturing retail industries, including E2Open and GT Nexus most recently. In that career, we've always kind of focused, Laura, on what the future would bring, and I think that we've made tremendous progress in some areas, but we've also lagged behind. So this is always an interesting topic for me to discuss.
Well, I can't wait to get into it. But before we do, tell the group a little bit about Levadata, because I think it's a pretty cool new technology.
Appreciate that, Laura. Yeah, Levadata is a solution provider for transforming direct material sourcing and more broadly supply management by using applied AI, really outside-in analytics and insights to drive constant sensing of risks and opportunities, and then recommendations on what actions sourcing professionals and supply chain teams should take to either mitigate those risks or take advantage of for example, cost opportunities that are emerging in their inbound supply chain.
Now, Richard, everybody says AI, but they mean different things. When you say AI or artificial intelligence, what is your definition?
Well, what's interesting for us is that AI is definitely an overused term, so it's really important to kind of go through definitions of what we mean. Our approach to kind of leveraging different AI methods is really to work backwards from what we call the final mile problem, which is the context of how does a sourcing professional gain insights or recommendations and drives better decisions and outcomes. So we're not an AI platform, but we do apply multiple AI methods around how do we kind of look at cluster analysis, for example, of where there's relationships between changes in prices or lead times or even unstructured and structured data combinations like news that then can be correlated or matched to the enterprise spend information that we're pulling from multiple enterprise systems. So there's a lot of work there in AI around classification, augmentation of data sources, and trying to use certain fuzzy logic to find, like, for example, similar or exact part match based on descriptors or attributes, and then also to extend basically the information that is limited in the enterprise with the richness of other attributes that we discover and relate. For example, raw materials or foreign exchange or sub-tier supplier relationships. And then as we go through sensing where those risks and opportunities are, we're also using machine learning to understand which of those risks and opportunities are acted upon and most relevant for the sourcing professionals. And then we're applying different NLP logic to a chatbot advisor and recommendation engine called Leva, which is intelligent and interacts with the user through text or through voice to actually make recommendations. And it's aware of what's relevant to that user and that persona, and it's also able to interact very freely. And so finally, what we're doing is looking at the negotiation process. And for the first time, we've actually modeled what are the common negotiation levers that are used. And so Leva is actually suggesting 4 or 5 different negotiation levers to use in with a key supplier that's based on multiple different sources of information. And then we're, predicting the outcome of that negotiation and of potential prices and costs, and then leveraging and even automating the negotiation sort of process by augmenting those professionals to be more efficient. So it's multiple AI methods under the hood, but it's all in the process of what we call sense, recommend, act, and learn as a continuous cycle.
Well, thanks for that. That's very helpful. Now, Richard, you and I have been in this space a long time. I won't bore the audience with how long.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think Supply Chain 2030 looks like? Because, we didn't make the progress that I think we thought we'd make if I had asked you that question at the turn of the decade.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the long view here is interesting. It's definitely humbling. If I go back in time, I had wide-eyed expectations, like a lot of us did to some extent, particularly after the B2B sort of marketplace era and transformation era that really occurred in the early 2000s. There was a lot that was envisioned that wasn't able to be realized for many good reasons. One of those key factors was organizational readiness of many sort of enterprise organizations around supply chain, because supply chain as sort of a discipline was still new and evolving. I think the second point was that supply chains weren't nearly as, generally speaking across industries, nearly as integrated or as globalized and interdependent as we see today. And third was that the technology and the underlying solution softwares to enable transformation were still in its infancy. And what we've seen is kind of a slowdown in innovation in many key areas within supply chain. Some of the areas that were really gotchas were really around integration. And there was an over-focus around enterprise sort of integration and supply chain data and sort of very difficult to scale and make standardized external integration to trading partners. I think it's been one key theme of that slowdown. And what's really needed, and I think the shift has already happened, is an outside-in perspective and approach to transformation and innovation is one big theme. And you talk about that with Network of Networks, and also this concept that we at Levadata relate to, which is this kind of always-on, always sensing sort of capability. And we think that design of solutions and that mindset from an organizational perspective is happening very quickly. And in the last 4 to 5 years, innovation has re-accelerated. And I think there's different reasons for that. Some of that is related to a broader definition of where supply chain's role is within the enterprise and strategy and digital transformation in general. And so we see that with big bets made on Industry 4.0 in Europe and the DACH region. We see that in companies looking end to end around their transformation vision, and supply chain is leading or a big part of that as they build new digital services, et cetera. So the second key point is that innovation from a technology perspective has gotten a lot easier because you've got cloud computing and scale out algorithms that you can burst, leverage and use. Whereas before, the hardware or the cost to manage that capability was really high. Now it's very much distributed and kind of linearized. And what's happened around algorithms and using kind of advanced math, let's just put it that way, rather than using AI code words, is that some of those have been very commodified. Some of them are very relatively easier to train, even though there's still work to be done. And we're not reinventing like we did back in the late 90s, building out custom operations research models to figure out how to optimize specific supply chain flows. Now we're seeing that the ability to use optimization or statistics and, certain AI methods has gotten a lot easier. So I think like Levadata, we're part of that next generation of new solution capabilities. And I think what that means is companies are able to accelerate down this curve a lot faster because these solutions are more purpose-built, and they're either automating things that really should be automated more intelligently, or they're augmenting the professional, the planner, the expert, and scaling that expertise with limited teams across a large global organization to make better decisions. And I think it will take, probably longer than we all expect, for these new wave of technologies and solutions to mature and integrate and extend existing investments. But I do think that we're going to see significant disruptive progress in 3 to 5 years, moving into that 2030 goal versus really, eclipsing what the progress of pace of change has been for the last 9 to 10 years in general.
So, Richard, I hear what you're saying, but yet I still see people focused inside out, looking at next evolution of ERP upgrade or, maintenance investments in traditional advanced planning systems. How do we get there? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that is the large boulder challenge for many companies, both from, defining kind of the balance between investments between those enterprise core, ERP upgrades, for example, or even, related master data management, et cetera, investments that are kind of part of this broader transformation. Those investment levels at most companies is outpacing sort of the next generation innovation areas of investment 10 to 1 up to 100 to 1, right? So the first recommendation is to senior leaders to revisit their portfolio of investments with the right stakeholders from IT, from finance, operations, commercial teams, and look to see if they're allowing for the right balance of trial and error with innovation and or scale out of those outside-in based investments that can be a real competitive advantage versus those investments that either achieve parity or have a very low relative ROI. I think there's a business-based conversation around that portfolio review that's really important. I think the second area is to look at and pick some areas that are transformational and have real clear business value, but take maybe a year and a half, 18 months to 2 years to invest to scale. So in that portfolio analysis, what I've seen is a lot of companies sort of in some ways excited about new innovation, but picking pilot or proof of concept scope areas that are so tiny and small that they don't have a chance. They're almost dead on arrival. They don't have a chance to scale or prove out value. And the impatience of a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how to innovate while they're executing on a quarterly basis, there's an impatience level there. And so I think there's a need to protect and extend the innovation timelines to prove things out, and allow things to kind of scale or take on a broader business scope or supply chain scope than typically we see. And this is true around areas around demand sensing, around planning, around automation. It's sort of across the board in many of these new areas of innovation within supply chain. And I think the third point is to really, this is related to the sort of the innovation challenges, the talent shortage, and the shift that's happening from a talent. There's a real opportunity as companies rethink about their talent development, professional internal development, and then their recruiting efforts from outside in, to take advantage of younger, maybe high potential talent that's coming into the organization new, because we find, particularly with many of our customers that are sort of moving very fast around a maturity model in our world, is that they're finding this healthy balance between digital natives, not just millennials, but new mindsets where they're data curious, they're data aware, and they're interested in leveraging analytics, insights, and new ways of doing things with low friction. And they're driving inspiration and collaboration with the folks that have been there for 15, 20 plus years to shift their own mindset, and they're becoming change agents. And I think that human dimension is a critical part of the success formula for accelerating and getting over those humps that we've seen. No one wants to work on a large ERP integration project, but they certainly may get excited about new ways of sensing demand or supply and making new decisions that are highly visible to the senior leadership team within these companies.
Well, Richard, you're always a person of stories. Can we close with a client story that maybe captures some of the points that you've just made?
Yeah, you bet. So one of my favorite customers is Fitbit. They make wearables, watches and other devices to manage our fitness and health. And they've undergone tremendous high growth early on in their career, and then they hit kind of a plateau and increasing competition from large players like Apple, and then low cost entrants from China. So they've always had to be nimble and lean, but highly innovative, or they wouldn't be successful in their business. And they had some new leadership come in around 2015 to run supply chain and sourcing, and they're kind of, they weren't technologists, but they were very principled around being data driven, and they saw that they had to scale their team, from 3 or 4 sourcing professionals to a broader global supply chain team, and they took an integrated approach between procurement and supply chain. And so what they were able to do is grow their revenues at 80% compound annual growth rate and scale their team and their spend coverage from like 50% to 100%, with the ability to compete and be successful with critical movements around capacity that was facing a lot of competition from larger OEMs like Apple, and they were beating competitors that had 800 people in their supply chain organization, and they had about 40. You know what I mean? And that scale out. And the key to their success was to bring on new talent and balance it with senior expertise and commodity management expertise and supply expertise, and then use new advanced analytics to sense where there were inbound risks in their supply chain, maybe at multiple tiers. And through this process, they reduced their analysis time from 3 to 4 months to prepare for a sourcing event down to 2 to 3 weeks. They increased their overall sustainable cost management goals, which are really aggressive to stay competitive, by 2 to 3% above their target goals. And more importantly, they increased massive agility. So they're able to sense shifts that were occurring in two to three tiers down in their supply chain, with key capacity changes or key swings in raw materials that were going to impact their supply chain, and act 6 to 7, 8 months faster than their nearest competitor because they were sensing it and responding to it faster. So while they were moving to more of a continuous sourcing model where they're always sensing changes in supply, changes in risk, changes in cost, and then engaging, collaborating more intelligently, their nearest competitors are working on a static, calendar-driven, maybe sourcing once a year, and taking months to absorb and synthesize, the changing landscape of their inbound supply chain. And I think Fitbit is a great example of what the overall industry needs to do to stay ahead. And it's very much kind of pulling in, applied AI and advanced analytics with an outside-in mindset, with a real key focus around agility. And they can prove, kind of in a David Goliath story, that small, nimble teams augmented with the right intelligence coming from, these new systems can allow them to outperform both size and scale of spend companies that are 10x their size. So I think that's an inspiring story for me, and I think it's one that points the way for companies large and small in multiple industries to find their competitive advantage by thinking about agility and thinking about innovation in talent in a new way.
Well, I knew I could always count on you for a story. Thank you, Richard, and I look forward to seeing you at the Global Summit.
I look forward to it as well, Laura. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, man. Bye now.